In 1975, a locomotive cavalcade was held at Shildon in County Durham to celebrate 150 years since the opening of the Stockton and Darlington Railway in 1825. A wide variety of locomotives was on display from all parts of Britain, many of them carrying famous names and every one of them in magnificent condition. It's not always realised how much time, expense and attention to detail is required to restore these locomotives to their former glory. One of the earliest steam locomotives to be developed for railway use was Locomotion, built in 1825, and the first locomotive to work on the historic Stockton and Darlington Railway. This is a replica of that famous locomotive, superbly built and in full working order, as can be seen here. Note the small four-wheeled coach at the rear of the train, which in the early days of passenger haulage on railways were developed from road stagecoaches. One of the famous and versatile class of LMS locomotives, the Stanier Black 5, a class which worked over virtually the whole of the British rail network. This one has been named George Stephenson in memory of one of Britain's most famous railway pioneers. A glimpse of a motive power depot in the last days of regular steam operation. These depots changed very little over the years, apart from the introduction of a few labour-saving devices such as this mechanical coaling tower, which could deliver 10 tonnes of coal in a matter of minutes. Turntable scenes such as this were commonplace at most loco sheds in steam days, but very few now exist. They can, however, be seen in operation at some preserved steam centres. Pick-up goods trains were at one time a familiar sight on Britain's railways, particularly on rural lines. The system involved wagons and vans being delivered or collected at various goods yards along the route. However, the decline of goods traffic, coupled with the introduction of freight liners and bulk carriers, has made this type of operation virtually obsolete. A steam footplate crew preparing their engine for the road. Most of these old skills will soon be lost in the approaching changeover to diesel working. A sad sight for many steam enthusiasts was the wholesale scrapping of thousands of steam locomotives, many of them still in their prime and capable of further useful service. Before the curtain came down on steam running on British Rail, Some locomotives were purchased privately, such as this express passenger loco, Duchess of Sutherland, seen here being offloaded at Butlins holiday camp in Ayr. It remained there on static display for several years, but is now based at Bressingham in Norfolk. Although steam was rapidly being phased out by BR throughout the 1960s, steam power still had a stronghold in the large area of industrial railways which lasted until the 80s. Amongst the largest users of steam power was the then National Coal Board, and a typical everyday scene is shown here with one of their numerous J94s pushing a rake of wagons up an incline. As regular steam operation on BR had to cease by August 1968, many locomotives were saved from the cutter's torch by various societies and individuals who realised that part of Britain's heritage could be lost forever. Restoration to full working order was often a costly and time-consuming business, but the end result justified the means. After a full works overhaul and looking magnificent in its pre-war maroon livery, Bahamas coasts into Holbeck Loco Shed in Leeds, where it will be checked out for a trial run. On board the footplate of a Black 5, the fireman is kept busy feeding the white-hot fire with a constant supply of coal. Time to admire the view as the train skirts around Morecambe Bay on a Carnforth to Barrow train. One of the most famous express trains is the Royal Scot, running between London Euston and Glasgow Central. This film, made in the 1950s, portrays some features of the journey between the two cities when regularly hauled by steam. The drivers of these crack expresses took great pride in their responsible job, and getting the engine ready wasn't just an empty phrase. The driver leaves nothing to chance and makes a personal inspection, carefully oiling and checking everything. "10 tons of coal will be used on the run." Slowly, the driver backs the locomotive onto the turntable. Under her own power, she turns herself round, ready to go back to Euston. The Royal Scot is waiting on platform 13. About 400 people travel every day on this famous train. The 150-ton locomotive City of Liverpool backs down onto the train. The guard checks final details with the engine driver. All is ready. The smooth, easy departure of a big train requires the synchronisation of a great many planned and timed operations. The station foreman gives the ready to the signal box. The off lights up to indicate that the road is clear. The station master has a word with the driver, and at 10 o'clock the R for right away lights up over the off indicator. Slowly the train starts off on its 400-mile journey. To help the train up the gradient to Camden, an engine banks in the rear. With the engine working hard, the Royal Scot surges up the gradient. The banker eases off and falls behind. The Scot runs towards the darkness of the first tunnel out of London. Passenger expresses have priority over goods trains, which because of their slower speed are often switched to a slower line. There's no time to fill the water tank, so the engine scoops up water from between the rails. The Scot uses something like 20,000 gallons of water on the journey. The train approaches Kilsby Tunnel, which is the 7th longest tunnel on the journey to Scotland. The Martello-like towers, which are 120 feet above the track, act as ventilation shafts to let the smoke out. The train roars out of the tunnel at the other end, nearly 1.5 miles further on. Travelling non-stop, the train passes through Wigan. The railwayman and his watch are inseparable. Ever onwards through Preston. Four hours from London and Lancaster Castle is passed. After Lancaster lie the Westmoreland Hills and the Lake District. Shap Gradient, with its 1 in 75 incline, has always presented a challenge to locomotives and their crews. Some trains required banking assistance up this gruelling 7-mile incline, but the Scots' powerful Duchess-class locomotive climbs the bank with ease and well within the booked time. Breasted the summit, the Scot quickly picks up speed as it passes through Shap Station and heads for Penrith and the Borders. At Carlisle, engines are changed after a 300-mile non-stop run. The waiting engine, City of Chester, is coupled up and the Royal Scot sets out on the second stage of the journey. Then on to the border at Gretna Junction, passing the trackside Rose of England on one side and the Thistle of Scotland on the other. The signalman keeps an eye on the train as it speeds through the junction. Passing through the steel-making towns of Lanarkshire and nearing the great city of Glasgow. Pulling into Central Station on time, the Royal Scot receives her traditional welcome from the waiting crowd, for she is of course the first train to arrive in Glasgow from London every day. An increasingly familiar sight during the period of the 1960s was redundant steam sheds flanked by new, modern buildings for servicing diesel and electric locomotives. At Carnforth in May 1968, steam was still in operation, albeit in a reduced capacity. Only 3 months were left before the steam ban came into operation on August the 4th. Most were goods trains, such as this one, arriving from the south and reversing into the marshalling yard. A diesel-hauled oil tanker train en route from Heysham to Leeds. This Black 5 is manoeuvring over various points and track work, eventually coupling up to a goods train which is being transferred to the West Coast Main Line dispatch sidings south of the station. The shed has a few engines in steam, but most of the sidings are taken up with parked engines waiting to be scrapped. Highly prized collector's items such as engine and shed code plates were removed prior to scrapping. To enable the often long journey to the scrapyard to be trouble-free, the connecting rods were usually removed either as a complete unit or, as seen here, simply cut off with a blowtorch. This Black 5 is about to take on water before its 30-mile run to Barrow on a goods train. Although water columns have almost totally disappeared from British Rail, they're still to be seen at the many preserved steam centres up and down the country. This engine is now preserved in Scotland, as is this one on the Lakeside and Haverthwaite Railway in Cumbria. Carnforth was constructed on its present site in World War II mainly by prisoners of war. One of the most important motive power depots in the north was King Moor, situated next to the West Coast Main Line, 2 miles north of Carlisle. In July 1967, steam was still being used, although in a very much reduced quantity, as the shed was due to close at the end of that year. Ironically, many of the engines to see service to the bitter end of steam were pre-war ones, such as the LMS Black 5s. This one was built in 1937. Another pre-war loco is Jubilee class Alberta, looking clean and smart in its Brunswick green livery. In the last few months of steam operation in the north, Alberta was in frequent use on mainline specials. British Rail's post-war design, Britannia-class John of Gaunt, backing into the shed. Only 3 of this class was in active service when this film was made, and 2 have since been preserved. Not such a rare sight is this line of condemned engines waiting to be scrapped. South of Carlisle is the now well-known Settleton-Carlisle line, which at the time of filming was a fairly busy route for both goods and passenger traffic. Heading south and destined for Leeds is this diesel-hauled train of empty coal wagons. Shortly afterwards, from the opposite direction, appears another goods train with Britannia-class Earl Haig at the head of a mixed bag of rolling stock. The steam shed on the right closed as from the 31st of December 1967, all engines having previously been removed for scrap. Nature over the years has effectively removed all traces of what was once a busy mainline steam depot. On the 11th of August 1968, British Rail ran what was claimed at the time to be the last steam train to run over the national network. It was known as the 15 Guinea Special. Seen here at Durran Hill after an emotional farewell from many thousands of people en route from Liverpool is the packed train with number 70013 Oliver Cromwell in charge. After a brief spell in Carlisle station, the train makes its return trip, this time powered by 2 immaculate Black 5s. Its days of mainline running virtually over, Oliver Cromwell starts on its long journey to preservation at Bressingham in Norfolk. In the aftermath of the final rundown of steam operation, many redundant sheds were abandoned and often left derelict for years. Some structures were more difficult to demolish than they were to build. Track work was quickly ripped up in shed sidings and once busy goods yards. In the process, many well-known landmarks disappeared forever. By 1969, the only steam locomotive permitted to run over the BR network was the ever-popular Flying Scotsman. Purchased privately from BR in 1963, it was fitted with another tender in order to carry extra water supplies for long journeys. Shown here in 1969 with 2 tenders. And in 1987, less the extra tender. In 1972, BR relented on their imposed steam ban and have since allowed the running of steam specials over certain selected routes. One of these is the scenic Settle and Carlisle, crossing over the Pennine Ridge which separates Cumbria from Yorkshire. Arriving at Appleby is one of these specials with Black 5 George Stephenson in charge. Appleby, a pleasant market town in Cumbria, is a favourite stopping off point for passengers, as well as providing the all-important supply of water for the engine. After unloading its passengers for an hour's break, the train reverses off the main line into a siding. Later on, having now travelled 16 miles further south, the Black 5 gets to grips with the arduous climb to the summit at A's Gill, passing Wild Boar Fell on the left. For many years, the Black 5s, a popular workhorse, were a familiar sight on this line on freight and passenger trains, often being pushed to their limit in sometimes appalling weather conditions. A favourite location for photographers as well as spectators is this part of the line, almost at the summit, which stands 1,169 feet above sea level. After a brief stop at Ribblehead station, the train leaves on a non-stop run to Leeds. The famous Ribblehead Viaduct can be glimpsed to the right of the engine. In the early 1970s, steam specials were introduced on the picturesque Hope Valley line in Derbyshire, which runs between Sheffield and Manchester. During that period, one of the engines to work over the line was the Jubilee-class Kolhapur, which was appropriate as this class often worked over the route in BR days. On what can only be described as a wet, dismal morning, Kolhapur, after a bout of wheel slip, leaves Edale station at the head of a multicoloured rake of coaches. The train was on its outward trip, travelling via Guide Bridge to Manchester. This is now the only direct rail link between Sheffield and Manchester, as the alternative Woodhead-Penistone line closed some years ago. The 11th of August 1993 saw the running of a double-headed special to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the original 15 Guineas special. The return journey took place in poor weather, but with a spirited performance from Black Fives, number 5407 and Bahamas. Running high up in the hills at Garsdale and now on level ground, the train surges ahead soon to enter the darkness of Rise Hill Tunnel. Beyond this point, the line drops steadily for the next 15 miles, levelling out at Settle Junction. For many a weary fireman travelling in the opposite direction, this stretch of line was aptly named the Long Drag. A few years after its run over the Hope Valley line, Kolhapur switched to equally familiar territory on the Settle and Carlisle. With its maroon livery glinting in the winter sunshine, it makes a vigorous exit from Appleby, heading north to Carlisle. Several major rivers originate in the Aysgill area, some only a stone's throw from the railway line. This one is the infant River Eden. These diesel multiple units in many instances have been in service for many years, but are now largely replaced by the Class 150 series of sprinters. The Princess Royal class of express passenger locomotives rarely saw service over the Settle and Carlisle, even during the hectic days of World War II. Their appearance on that line is therefore all the more welcome, even in pouring rain, as number 6203 Princess Margaret Rose leaves Garsdale after a photo stop. Situated at Alston, high in the Pennines on the Cumbria-Northumbria border, is the South Tynedale narrow gauge railway. This line runs through attractive unspoilt countryside over the trackbed of the former BR branch line to Haltwhistle. Most of the steam locomotive stock is of continental design and manufacture, such as Thomas Edmondson, seen running round its train in the station. And Thomas Edmondson, by the way, is the man who invented railway tickets. Setting off with what appears to be a guard's van next to the engine, the train passes the site of the former goods yard on the left. Flying Scotsman has been at the head of many steam specials, not only in Britain but also the USA and Australia, and due to media coverage and widespread public attention has developed a sort of locomotive charisma which is undoubtedly well deserved. At the head of a midweek special from London Euston and in glorious summer weather, Flying Scotsman enters Appleby Station and after only a very short break departs for the north. A feature that sometimes occurs with steam specials is the photo run past. Believed to have originated in the USA, this involves the train, devoid of passengers, backing down the track and then charging forward, often working flat out with impressive smoke effects. With cameras and sound recorders at the ready, the passengers really do make the most of the event. The diesel unit seen here, coupled next to the Black 5, is required during winter months to provide electric power to the carriages for heating purposes. A great variety of motive power is to be seen on mainline steam specials, quite often with a class of engine not native to that area. A typical instance is seen here with Southern Railway West Country class City of Wells experiencing a bout of wheel slip as it moves its empty train into the sidings at Appleby. Later in the day and in fast fading light, City of Wells hastens its way north, crossing over the A66 Appleby bypass. Many weekend charter trains are powered by diesel engines, one of the most numerous being the Class 47. This one is returning its train to Norwich. The LNER A4 Pacific Mallard, in its striking garter blue livery, belongs to a select breed of locomotive designs that have gone down in history. On the 27th of July 1938, Mallard achieved a speed of 126 mph on a special test run, a world record that remains to this day. Mallard is normally kept on static display at the National Railway Museum in York, but in 1988 it was decided to bring it up to full working order to enable it to take part in a limited number of mainline runs over certain routes. And one of the selected routes was the Settle and Carlisle, where even the weather was good for Mallard's run. Although a far cry from its days of fast sprints on crack expresses, the famous locomotive puts up a worthwhile performance on the long, gruelling climb to Ays Gill. At the same spot, but on a different date, LNER number 3442, the Great Marquis, makes a spirited attack at the incline as it approaches with a rake of Pullman coaches in tow. At Garsdale Station, almost all steam specials stop to take on water, and usually, weather permitting, passengers seize the opportunity of taking photographs. As the original water supply facilities were removed many years ago, it now has to be pumped in from a nearby stream. Having filled up, the train heads south, travelling over one of the very few level stretches of track on this line. Garsdale Station again, but on a different date and photographed from the northern end of the station. On a bright summer's day, Bahamas, with its distinctive double chimney, glides into the station for the Manchester to Carlisle special. "191 of these locomotives were built, and many were named after British colonies. To the right of this picture, a branch line originally went to Hawes, eventually continuing on to Northallerton. Number 6201 Princess Elizabeth is a sister engine to Princess Margaret Rose, and both are powerful units capable of hauling the heaviest express trains, which indeed they did in regular service. She's seen here crossing Armathwaite Viaduct heading south with a Caledonian Express headboard on the front. To the loud accompaniment of exploding fog detonators placed on the track, number 5029 Nunney Castle makes a vigorous exit from the south end of Appleby Station, putting on an impressive display of pyrotechnics in the process. The previous week, Nunney Castle made its debut on the Settle and Carlisle line, heading a northbound train. And its appearance was of some considerable interest, as the last time a Great Western engine worked on this line was in October 1967, when number 7029 Cluncastle was in charge of a Liverpool to Carlisle special. A few miles north of Appleby is Culgaith, with its long closed station but still active level crossing, one of the very few on the line. On a long straight stretch, Nunney Castle approaches with warning whistle and heads for Culgaith Tunnel. A cold winter's afternoon at the remote station of Kirby Stevens sees Southern Railway number 35027 Tor Valley coasting down from the summit at Aysgill with a northbound train. After taking on water at Appleby, Tor Valley hurries away on the last stage of its journey north. With clearly a willing crew in charge, their steed puts up an impressive visual as well as sonic display as it lifts the train up the slight gradient out of Appleby. Another Southern Railway engine to tackle the Pennine Fells was number 828, one of the S15 class. With a reputation for being a strong and able engine, number 828 certainly had no problems in climbing up the gradient to Crosby Garrett.